Welcome to the Inferno Cast. Today's guest has a lifetime of martial arts experience. He is known as being the founder of the Dog Brothers, which is full contact stick fighting. And he also was introducing ground fighting to stick fighting back in 1990 before the UFC had even started. Today we have Mr. Marc Denny, also known as Crafty Dog. How are you doing today, sir?
Just an old man having a good time. Do let me add to your intro there that I'm the co-founder, not the founder. There was also Eric Canals, Top Dog, and Arlen Sanford, Salty Dog. The three of us are the co-founders. I'm considered the guiding force of the Dog Brothers. You know,
Yes,
that's where
sir.
I've been in this. And then there's Dog Brother Martial Arts, of which I am the founder, head instructor.
Yes, sir. Well, you have definitely, set a legacy for the martial arts world with your training and what you guys have done over the last 30, 40 years. And it's been an amazing thing to observe because for me, being a younger person coming into it, you guys had already had the momentum and the organization was large whenever I kind of got introduced to it as a kid, which kind of brings me to what I wanted to start with was your original introduction to martial arts. Like, was it movies, books, magazines? Was it a person? Do you remember what really drew you to the martial arts in the very beginning?
Yeah, I do. I grew up in New York City. I'm 67 now, so I was growing up in the late 60s, and New York was a very violent place then. And so there were various incidents of street crime that I had to deal with. A friend of mine and I jumped by three guys in the park. Our bicycle smashed. Three guys beating me up on the stairs at school and taking my wallet. Was you know you know um, very there was a girl I was dating in the far reaches of the Bronx, and so coming back at 2 a.m, and there's junkies on the platform hunting you and so forth. And so the because I'd taken some time off from college, I graduated from college in a December, and I had an open semester before beginning law school. And so I did a semester at a Mexican law school to take my Spanish to a more adult level. And afterwards, a friend of mine and I went down cruising through southern Mexico. And it's a story I've told elsewhere, but we were in a town called San Cristobal de las Casas, which is in the state of Chiapas, which is the one that borders Guatemala. So we were far south, and there were these two blonde American hippie type girls who were kind of struggling along, and we gallantly we spent some we went horseback riding. As we came back into town, there was something that turned into a fight between four guys, and Luis and I, as we were protecting these two girls from being dragged off, and it went to the police station, and the police ran away, and by the time the dust cleared, Luis and I were thrown in the state prison for 3 days. It's a story I've told elsewhere, but something like that will really focus your mind. And so my last semester of law school, there was a fellow by the name of Sifu Paul Vizio, who at the time, there was something called the Professional Karate Association. So this would be winter of 80, 81. And that was the transition from tournament karate to fighting. There's actual boxing gloves, and the kicks were allowed only above the waist. And so Sifu Paul, he went on to become the 132-pound division world champion in that. And so he was using the class for his own conditioning workout. So the class started with 36 people, and it finished with 6 people by the end of the semester. And so that was the process that I used to get over smoking cigarettes, because God damn it, I wasn't going to be one of the people who had to, who couldn't finish the class and sit down. And so I was very much driven by not so much young male ritual hierarchical issues, the bully kicking sand in my face kind of a thing, but much more, okay, how do I deal with those 3 junkies on the subway platform at 2 a.m? Or, oh yeah, I remember that time those 2 guys were trying to corner me on 93rd Street for a mugging. Or, I'm thinking more problems like that. And so after a year of lawyering in Washington, I moved out to California, and saw a guy practicing on the beach. It was Long Beach, and the way it works here is Long Beach is part of the harbor, so there's a breakwater. No one uses the beach at Long Beach. I was living in the area, and so I was just catching some sun during the day. And so this guy was there and doing these obvious martial art movements, and so started a conversation, and he wound up introducing me to a place called the Kali Academy, which is where Gurren Asano and Sifu Richard Bastillo were partnered there together. And so as I went into there, I should mention, while I was in Washington lawyering, I was doing Taekwondo in the absence of anything else. So I made it to green belt. Ooh. But when I went into the Kali Academy, there's people waving sticks and knives around. There's this pro Muay Thai fighter kicking a heavy bag. My Taekwondo mind was blown. This guy's like 5'6", and he's got calves the size of my thighs, and the power's there, and sticks and knives. It's I've now found what I'm looking for. And so that's where I really connected.
So you didn't come through the fanfare idea of grandeur, as the little kid wants to be, the Bruce Lee martial artist. You came in from a very logical, like, I'm an adult, I've been in real danger. There has to be an approach to this that can physically keep me safe in unreasonable circumstances. That's not sport fighting. So you really came at it from a different approach that you don't hear that story a lot of, that being people's first influence.
Yeah, very much so. So, for example, in that fight in Mexico that I mentioned in Chiapas, I didn't have any proper fight training, but because I had traveled extensively through the interior of Mexico on nothing but my motorcycle, back then, belts were very wide. It was, leftover influence from the late 60s. And so I had a belt buckle about yay big, because that's about how broad the belts were. So it's an extra one. And so the post across here, if you grabbed it like this, it was in effect a very vicious brass knuckles. And so I always had that in my back pocket. So when it was two of us, I was the guy doing the rear guard motion as we're breaking off from these four guys. And, I'm threatening them with these guys, and they're trying to circle me. And they break off saying, "Vamos a coche por la pistola." Let's go to the car and get the pistols. So like, hey, so we run to the town square, which is always where the police station is. And there's only one cop on duty. So we run up there, these guys after us, and they have a gun. But he was only a transit cop, so he didn't have a gun. All he had was a screwdriver. Because what transit cops would do in those days, there not being a central computer system in Mexico to enforce tickets, is the transit cop would use the screwdriver to remove your license plate, and then when you came back to the car, he would sell it back to you. And that's how parking was enforced. And so he, only having a screwdriver, so when these guys came roaring up in their Volkswagen Bug, he ran away. Now, they didn't have a gun. That was just a bluff to scare us. It worked. But they had car antennas and Coke bottles, and so there was this wild fight in front of the police station. But I had, this belt buckle as brass knuckles kind of a thing, and there's a whole story there. I've told it elsewhere, right. but I'm just affirming your point that the nature of my interest was not what most martial arts is about. As I organize my thinking about these things, there's 4 types of human aggression: territory, hierarchy, reproduction, males for the female, female in defense of the young, or predatory, the criminal, give me your wallet. So that's going to be the behavior of if a lion's not going to go after the alpha male water buffalo of the herd. He's going to go after the just born baby zebra. The predator is looking for a safe score. If the score, he doesn't want to become injured as a part of just a simple act of acquiring a meal. And so those behaviors, each of which are different. At least 95% of martial arts is about young male ritual hierarchical combat. Boxing, wrestling, judo, jiu-jitsu, Muay Thai, and of course, MMA. And so back in the early days of the UFC, I'd started with the Machado brothers in 1990, 3 years before the UFC, by the way. But in the early days of the UFC, you were seeing the strikers do very badly. And so a lot of people who had invested a lot of time and ego into that training, what is a natural human thing to do is to come up with excuses. And so you know, the two most common were, I wouldn't let them get that close to me, I'd just stick and move. And the other one was, well, you wouldn't want to do that in a street fight against more than one person. And at that time, Horry and Gracie had a column in Black Belt magazine. And, you know, many people now are in this audience were not alive back when there were magazines. It was before the internet. But before the internet, the magazines were the way to do it. And the dominant magazine was Black Belt. And Horry and Gracie had a column there because of Royce's success in the UFC. And so one of his one month he wrote this article, you know, addressing the rationalizations of people about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And he says, not 95% of street fights go to the ground. And you know, you say you just stick and move. Well, come prove it. You know, and then he says, and as for the argument about more than one person, he says, you guys can't fight one person. What are you worried about more than one? And so as you react there, you know, a witty thing to say, but it's actually very erroneous. And here's the problem. He is thinking purely from a male hierarchical status point of view. He's thinking of a challenge fight, a beach fight on, you know, at Brazil. Oh, you know, you may have seen the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu in action. And here, this man, he has been talking trash about Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. So we went to have a talk with him. And as you see here, and the crowd is surrounding them as they're rolling around in the sand. And I'm thinking like, no, that's not the way it was when it was 2-on-4 with these 4 locals who were trying to drag off the girl who had been with my buddy. You know, there were Coke bottles and car antennas, and it was 4 against 2. And, you know, so the answer to his question, what, you know, is use weapons. That's what you do when there's more than one person. It is not a hierarchical, honorable fight. In a hierarchical fight, implicit in the logic of it is we are members of the same group, and that when one man accepts the loss, the status is settled. And then there's like, okay, you know, we good. And the social unit, the pack, the tribe, is not lastingly damaged. The pack, the tribe, exists precisely for the mutual benefit of the members. So if you can't settle a hierarchical issue without damaging the loser, then you have a weaker pack, you have a weaker tribe. And whereas the logic of a predatory criminal attack is completely different. And so for me, it was, as I was looking, here I am starting martial arts at 29 or 30, and I very much was interested in my skills being real. So that's a very late start. And the only adrenal training that I was seeing around was the beginning of real kickboxing. Muay Thai had just started coming in. Gurren Asano, my teacher, had partnered up with Ajahn Chai Sirasut, you know, who's, you know, pivotal in bringing Muay Thai to America. So I'm thinking, well, kickboxing is like, okay, but I'm already at that point, like 33, 34, you know, who starts kickboxing at that age? And it was at that point, and at the time I was training with a guy by the name of Paul Vunak, who I'd met at the Kali Academy. And he was very articulate about trapping. And that made sense to me in the context of the kind of problems that I was thinking about. And in that context, he said that stick fighting was very good for developing trapping. So one day these 2 guys came into class, you know, his class was in the alley out behind his house. And it was Bill Gay and Chris Marcus. And, you know, they got all these bruises over the Bill in particular, had these monstrous hematomas all over his leg. I said, damn, man, what happened? He says, we've been stick fighting. And, you know, the only stick fighting I'd heard about was the death matches in the Philippines. I said, but you're not dead. Yeah. He says, well, there's this guy we met, you know, in the park, da. You know, he had this gleam in his eye, and it's, you know, I said, wow. So, you know, can I go watch the next time? He says, yes. I went with him. I said, that's how I met Eric. And it made sense to me that this was the place that I could have the adrenal training to go with the physical training. Because what most people don't have clear in their thinking is that there's not most people know 2 responses to aggression, fight or flight, but there's 5. You know, let me put it on you. What other ones can you think of? There's fight, flight, what else?
I would say that you could the banding together, where like you seek another ally.
All right.
Um, maybe that I could see freezing. I would say that.
Yes, very good. That is possibly, for good people, that's a really common one.
Yeah.
And
Um,
there's this one time growing up in New York, three friends and I were playing touch football on the sidewalk in front of my building, 79th Street, so it's a wide sidewalk. And for not saying this out of ethnic issues, just the realities of New York. Spanish Harlem began at 96th Street, so these four tough Puerto Rican kids, Spanish meaning Puerto Rican, they had come down to our neighborhood, and so they took the football, and this one, he just, he went to say, hey, give the football back. My friends ran away. The doorman to our building, he's looking away. And this guy says, no, he's got my football. Give me the football. And he goes, boom. And I saw the punch coming, but I was just so stunned. I froze. He hit me square in the forehead. Didn't hurt me. But, just an example of I froze. And this is what good people do. I mean, you're like, why are you taking my football? Give me my football back. And they're like, sort of the anger of, like, why do you have and I don't, kind of a thing. And just to finish the story, the 70-year-old woman, who turned out to be my step grandmother, the mother of my stepfather. She just sees what's going on. Remember, the doorman, he's been a coward. He's looking away. She comes up brandishing her umbrella saying, shoo, you ruffians, shoo. And these guys, they're like only 14. They're not hardcore bad. And, just like, oh, here comes Granny. And they just like toss the football and, just scamper off, continued on their day. But I just remember that shoo, you ruffians, shoo. Of course, the doorman was mortified that he had been outmanned by this 70-year-old Jewish grandmother. But anyway, how do we get on all this?
So,
The responses to danger: fight, flight, freeze. There's also to posture. Who do you think you're messing with? The toad puffing up his air sac, right?
yeah.
There's to placate. Hey man, come on, we don't, to try and placate. And then there's to submit. I give up. Don't hurt me.
Yeah.
And so what happens to a lot of good people is when they have the real adrenal dump of real danger, it's different when you're on 93rd Street at 2 a.m. and there are these two large aggressive individuals of a different ethnic group, and it's pretty clear they're stalking you to, kick your ass and take your money, or, that's a different kind of a situation. And so if you've not experienced operating in the adrenal state, it's hard to know whether your skills are going to appear. Fine motor skills do deteriorate. And so for me, given my motivations, it was like, okay, how can I go about my training? So when I met Eric, it's like, okay, this is the adrenal state, and this is going to help me develop my trapping. This is going to help me develop my empty hand skills. So unlike a lot of the people in stick fighting where it was, well, if it were a blade and I touched you, I would be defanging the snake. We were like, no, it's a stick. And at first, Eric wasn't grappling with people because at 6'4", 220 and a former defensive end for Columbia University football, most people in the martial art, he would have just terrified people. He was just always looking for people to spar with. And, if he overwhelmed them, they wouldn't come back, but as we developed a group, what we call the After Midnight group at the Inosanto Academy, Guru Asano knew Eric as a top student under his good friend, Grand Tuangake. So I was able to bring Eric into the senior class, and we got permission to stick around after class was over. And this group developed around us, the After Midnight group, which then became a major portion of the guys who showed up at what we call the Rumble at Rambless, which was 3 consecutive days of fighting, which is where the Dog Brothers began. And so, it was there at the After Midnight group that we had guys who were not going to be freaked out if there were grappling, and because the clinches were happening. Eric had a background in, I think this is underappreciated, in lacrosse. And I wish I had been exposed to lacrosse, when I was young enough to have done it. It's an awesome game, but you basically have a stick with a basket at the end, and you're catching and throwing the ball, but you're also being deceptive with this thing as you're running around and crashing into people.
Yeah.
Eric had that, defensive lineman, Mongo Smash little man with a ball personality. He had the agility of lacrosse and the deceptiveness of the stick. So what he brought to his expression in fighting was not just the expression of the movement of Bikiti Tertia, but it was also the influence of the lacrosse, the influence of the football, and he also had played a lot of handball. So, there's that, two-handed agility, left and right, is versus the way so many of people at that point, everybody was a righty, and if you were a lefty, you learn righty because everybody else in the class would get upset because they didn't like dealing with a lefty, and so right sticks forward, right foot forward, and this kind of a thing here, which really did not represent the realities of when someone has a club and they're coming, Mongo Smash, deal with this. And so the grappling became part of things even before I had run into the Machado brothers. And so, but, with that grappling as part of things in the After Midnight group, that was where, the bulk of the original Dog Brothers came from. So I'm talking a lot. I should,
No, that's, no, I mean, that ties together and is logical. And it brings me to my next question is, so where is the balance of, the damage you take from the live action drills versus the longevity? Because I know that's everybody's first question, and I just wanted we'll jump into that one first, and then we'll get into the full picture, because I know you've expanded, so much more of, the kind of the concept of these exchanges. So where would we start with that?
Yeah, a good question, key question. And here's the way I think about it is in the magic words that I speak at the beginning of a day: no judges, no referees, no trophies. One rule only: be friends at the end of the day. This means our goal is that no one spends the night in the hospital. Our goal is that everyone leaves with the IQ with which he came. However, only you are responsible for you, so protect yourself at all times. No suing no one for no reason, for nothing, no how, no way. And so no judges, no trophies, no referees, no judges. The meaning of the experience is not to be made by others. You decide for yourself what your experience meant. No judges, no trophies. You are not doing it for the adulation. In the beginning, there wasn't anybody there except those actually doing the fighting, but even so, and then no referees. With a weaponry fight, you cannot just go apeshit and then say the referee will pull me off when it's time, because too much damage can be done with a weapon. For example, a puño, you could take, there's shots you could take that would leave somebody going home with less IQ than with which they arrived. Our goal is that everyone leaves with the IQ with which he came. And so, we are, one rule only: be friends at the end of the day. It is if we are members of the same tribe, preparing each other to stand together to defend our land, women, and children. So if we go too soft on each other, we're not properly tested and vetted. But if we go too hard on each other and we ding each other up, then we're damaging each other. And then when it's time to stand together, we're less of a unit than we otherwise could be. And so those values enable us to go into hellacious fights, but at the same time, the honor code, and everyone, you're there for the experience, but it's also very much you want the respect of others there. So if you break the code, you lose respect, and you got people there who will explain it to you that the shots that would be too much don't get taken. So somebody's stunned. Well, in the UFC, it's like, and the guy's laying on the ground, and everyone's going, yay! That's not how we do it. It's
Would you say it's very much a tribe mentality of kind of self-regulation?
Absolutely. We speak of the Dog Brothers as a tribe. We are preparing each other to stand together. So you can have guys of vastly different skill levels, and the more experienced guy will push and test the guy. He'll hit him well, but the idea is not to break his spirit. So it's and I would say those values are essential to our being able to do what we do.
Absolutely. So So whenever somebody, is looking for the reality-based training, I mean, something that is like going to translate into, real life scenarios with barriers, weapons, multiple attackers, etc. What do you feel like are the foundational blocks of starting on that journey? Like, where do people need to start? Your average person like yourself. I mean, you're a lawyer that got out of law school that
I
was in.
used to be, but I outgrew it. Yeah.
Correct, and you're almost 30, your 22-year-old prime is gone, and here you are trying to learn, the reality-based martial arts, and now here you are all these years later. So what do you feel like are the foundational principles that can set somebody on a proper launching platform to get into this, to get educated properly?
To get into Dog Brothers fighting,
Well,
or
just any type of martial arts, like what does their approach need to be when they're looking to learn martial arts, and come from a discerned position?
well, in my teaching, what I something I've become clear on in recent years is that I'm always asking, what is the problem being solved?
That is a very good one. I
What is
like
the
that.
problem being solved? So for me, the problem in my head was being solved. Yeah, I remember those, three guys who jumped to my friend and I, in that part of Central Park. I remember the four guys trying to drag the girl off from us in Chiapas. And, I remember what happened during the 3 days when we were in prison. Like, okay, there was this moment where there's a whole story there, but there was an, eyeball to eyeball moment, whereas, someone, as a white American in a, in a prison in southern Mexico, I was obviously not from around there. And, so there's, so there's some of those eyeball to eyeball moments. So, that I was thinking more in terms of solving problems like that.
Yeah.
Where somebody else is like, he's an athlete, he wants to compete, different things. So, in the what attracted me to the Filipino martial arts was Gurren Asano's book about the Filipino martial arts, in combination with what I saw, as I already related that day at the Kali Academy. But his book began with stories of some of the old masters that he had trained with, and particularly John Lacosta. And so stories of him in his 80s handling teenage punks, who tried harassing him. That is what I found inspiring. And so that's really the core of the mission statement for Dog Brother Martial Arts, which is to walk as a warrior for all your days. So I have always trained with the idea of like, yeah, I want to be an old man who, when, a problem comes up and I'm being underestimated, surprise, you
Right.
shouldn't have messed with this old
Absolutely.
man. So that's where I'm motivated by.
And
And so, now if somebody wants to compete, they're a young guy, and we can do that too.
yeah, to
But
each their own.
yeah, but so for what I was looking for, it was important that I experience adrenaline. And there's country music song. My wife likes country music, and and in the decades since my youth, the musicianship's improved. Anyway, it goes something like this: I ain't as young as I once was, but I'm as young once as I ever was. So if you, yeah, and so back when I was fighting, our fights were 3 minutes, and you fought several fights in a day. But but that even that there came out of my New York experience. I said, you might have to sprint trying to get away from the junkies. You're running down the subway platform. Oh, damn, this airway's locked off. It's usually open. I thought I was good. And you're like, okay, now after, this 100-yard dash, this sprint, and that sprint might be initiating on a night when it's 20 degrees and your legs aren't really warm. Uh, you know, different realities, and you got your heavy parka on, and it's different. Um, and it's like, okay, now you're going to have to move explosively for a certain amount of time. It's not the aerobic pacing of a ring contest. So it seemed 3 minutes to seem to be a good test, that if you could explode for 3 minutes, that was a realistic standard. And so that ability to explode, the ability to go nitrous. I mean, even now, I'm 67, but I still get out to the football field at the high school up the end of the block a couple of times a month. You know, I try to do it every week where I do my footwork, basic footwork, football agility footwork.
Mhm.
And, you know, maybe twice a month, I time myself in the 100-yard dash. You need to know what your top end is. You know, you might be like, yeah, I can run 5 miles, and you know, but but you know, what can you explode?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you know, so I used to be able to explode for 3 minutes, and it's less than that now. But my top end is not too far off of where it was, you know, all those years ago. It's just I can stay there for not as long.
Right. Yeah.
You know, so, but, you know, that's how I organize my training. So, you
Mhm.
know, for my training, and when you say, what is the problem being solved? I'm not involved in hierarchical issues in my life anymore. So, you know, one of the things we want to keep in mind is, you know, I was talking about the types of aggression. So, what are the types of aggression that at my age I'm concerned about? They're not hierarchical. I'm married with children. They're not reproductive. You know, at my age, I'm not out serving our country, you know, defending our nation. I'm proud to say that I'm a combatives instructor for the U.S. Army, you know, level 3 in the MACP program, and a subject matter expert for Border Patrol, and work with some other folks as well. You know, so I'm very proud of that, but I'm not, you know, I'm not strapping on 80 pounds of gear and, you know, going outside the wire. Um, but So for me, the rules of engagement are these. So far as is possible, be on good terms with all men. Good manners is good policy. You never know who you're messing with. Here's key one. What you think of me is none of my business. We are wired, particularly as we're young men looking for respect, and that's very much part of the, you know, the trajectory of the human male is to, he looks for respect within the tribe and the status. That helps you get women. Um, but in the modern world, we have a lot of something that our biological evolution didn't really prepare us for, which is mass anonymous interaction. I live in Los Angeles. I drive, you know, some guy cuts me off in traffic. I've never seen him before. He's never seen me before. We're never going to see each other again. And somebody like, oh, fuck you. Well, no, fuck you. What? We're, you know, I can't be, well, he disrespected me. Well, but so what? He's anonymous to you. But we are wired to want to respond to that disrespect. And so in our rules of engagement, I think it's important to be clear that we have the rule operating principle of what you think of me is none of my business. Otherwise, you get to decide whether I fight or not. And with all the different subcultures in America, people are going to have different assumptions about what is appropriate in such a fight. You know, if we're in a small town and it's, you know, somebody disrespects, at the bar, you're both talking to the same girl, and, you know, like, all right, well, let's take this outside. You know, we probably should go over on the grass here so we don't hurt our head on the concrete. And then, you know, that's a hierarchical fight.
Yeah.
And everyone's going around and one, you know, all right, man, he's had enough, and, you know, different kind of thing. But if you get in some sort of anonymous interaction, you know, the assumptions may not be the same.
Yeah.
And so what you think of me is none of my business, then avoid the 3 S's: stupid people in stupid places doing stupid things. And that there'll cover most of it. And then there's, is this worth going broke hiring a lawyer? Is this worth going to prison over? So for me, the problem being solved is like, okay, what happens when someone is pushed past all those boundaries? Now, I'm not as durable as I used to be. I'm pretty good for my age, I like to think, but you know, it's like anybody pushes past those criteria, that is pretty much by definition a fight I can't lose. A hierarchical fight is, well, maybe you do lose. It's a hierarchical fight. But anything that's going to come my way is one I can't lose. And just like my answer to Jorge and Gracie's, well, you can't fight more than one. Why are you worried about more than one? The answer is, if it's more than one, I'm using weapons. And so if somebody corners me into a fight, it's a fight I can't lose. And therefore, like, okay. Now in California, I can't carry a gun. but something, so in my teaching, the three areas are real contact stick fighting, which is, the adrenalize the weaponry. There's Kali Tudo, which is where I take the assertion and I run with it, that in empty hand, the movements are like those of the weapons. And so that's the conversation there that I find very interesting. And the third area is die less often, the interface of gun, knife, and empty hand. And so you have to be able to go up and down the force continuum, because the part of your environmental awareness includes the awareness of your legal environment. And our legal system is not a justice system, it's a legal system. Right. And those two things are not the same. So for example, when I'm working with Border Patrol, I am what they call an intermediate force expert. Going, they might be just arresting some guy who's coming here to be a gardener, or, dishwasher, plenty, good hardworking people, and that's right here. On the other hand, it might be these are drug mules. Well, they might be more inclined to get froggy, and then there's also sometimes, these BORTAC teams that are out there along the border, they might be running into what's called a RIP gang, which is highly armed, highly trained people of one cartel looking to rob the drugs of another cartel out there in the vast spaces. Nearest help's 40 miles away, kind of a thing. And so when, if these guys are, typically in a team of 2 to 4 guys, so they, might be just doing basic arrest procedure. Okay, this guy's resisting a bit. Oh, well, now, somebody else has jumped on you because they don't want, they paid thousands of dollars to come this far and they want to see if they can get away. Or, it could be, some kind of narco guy. So you have to be able to go up and down the force continuum. And so that's the die less often stuff. It's not like, oh, I have a gun, well, I'll shoot you. Well, there's, a lot of consequences that can go with that. So the training, the preparation is to be well-rounded and well prepared for that. So for me, I ain't as young as I once was, but I'm as young once as I ever was. There is a place within yourself which is forever young. So whatever you tasted when you were a young man, that memory lurks in you somewhere. And so that's the switch you want to be able to throw. That's where you go nitrous. And, for however much you got, for that, you're a young man.
Yeah.
And so that's how I organize my training for myself.
Well, that philosophy of what problem are you solving? That right there explains so much, and especially from just a structural point of view, because, you have a higher education of going through the legal environment, which is, kind of based on like a legal, precedent kind of system where it's like, the linguistics of it and following the logical patterns. And I can feel that coming out as you talk, because it makes so much sense that, because every circumstance is not going to be the same resolution. Where, like you said, some people you need to sit down and they need to be put in handcuffs by law enforcement, or somebody just needs to be sat down at a family reunion because they had too much, versus, somebody that puts you in imminent danger. So whenever you have that philosophy and that scalable approach, how do you educate the transfer between those different concepts of, this is going to be a time in which I need to pull back the violence. This is a time it needs to accelerate. Like, where's that intermediary of like kind of switching back and forth? Does that come from just drills in the gym? Does it come from a mix of the adrenaline push? How do you become well-rounded?
It's going to depend on the person. And, for example, I had a guy come to me one time. He was from Malaysia, ethnic Chinese. And so the nature of things in Malaysia at that time, and I'm guessing not dissimilar now, is the ethnic Chinese often were the subject of hostile behavior by the Muslim majority. And this is a guy, he's like the stereotype of the guy with the Coke bottle, the bottom of a Coke bottle glasses. Thick glasses. So he's like, I want to be able to defend me and my fiance. If I get some, thug punk types, who are looking to harass us, well, I'm not going to be working him on his double leg takedown. It's And so there's different blocks of material for different things. So something that I've been working on a lot recently, a fellow by the name of Lloyd DeYoung and I have partnered up and developed a system that we call Rapid Transients Weapon Craft, RTW. And that the name is a reference to the theories of John Boyd, who developed what most people know as the OODA loop. You familiar with the OODA loop?
Yes, sir.
And he's a very interesting, very deep guy. And so what Lloyd brings to our collaboration, I guess we're two grandmasters of one system, as it were. He comes out, he's from South Africa. And in South Africa, there's something called Piper, which is a criminal knife system. So it's for prison assassination, it's for criminal assault in the street. And so it is knife versus unarmed. And well, whereas the martial art guy, he tends to be, well, you have a knife and I have a knife, because if you don't have a knife, why would I be fighting you? And it's like, well, the criminal says, so I can take your money, so I can take your woman, so I can kill you. The movement of Piper is extraordinary, and it has its origins in the Nguni stick fighting, which would be the Zulus or some of the other tribes. And so the movement is there. And so Lloyd has this idiom of movement that's very different, and the logic of the system is very different. He's got some other things too. He's got some great mobility drills, and he's also got a body material that he calls tripwire, which is for when it gets nose to nose. In my own training and experience back in the mid-late 80s, Pendecker Paul Dutour of the Bukni Nagara Penjak Silat system was training Gurun Asano and teaching a class at the Inasano Academy. And very sophisticated leverage. And but some of the Silat stuff to the sort of practical minded American, you can kind of go, yeah. And being the know-it-all American that I sometimes was, even more then than now, he's class one. He says, "I need a volunteer, Mark." He calls me up to volunteer, and he gets like this in front of my nose, nose to nose, and he's, eyeballing me, real direct. And he says, "Okay, do something." And what I realized was at this distance, I had nothing. I had nothing. Everything that I required would have had for me, I had to step back and do this. And all of a sudden, movements like this started making sense, because at this distance, I have come from his peripheral vision. There's the elbow. I'm turning him here like this. I'm now stomping the knee sideways. Yeah, if you say to an MMA guy, that's what you do, he thinks you're an idiot. But in that moment was a moment of satori for me. There's different paradigms of fights. And so right now, as we look at the martial arts scene, for most people, the paradigm of reality is MMA. But there's a lot of stuff that's, well, maybe that's not what they were thinking of when they developed, the material was developed. You get some guy who's talking, he's waving his hands in your face and this and that. Well, okay, yeah, you can do a backhand gunting on your way coming in here like this. Now, if you got to, we're already out there at range and moving, and the guy's got a boom, stinging jab. Well, that backhand gunting may be tough to pull off. But if you got some guys in your face and he's talking, different paradigms. As I said in the beginning, what is the problem being solved?
Absolutely. It becomes so circumstantial, and I really feel like that's something that gets lost in the martial arts, because, I was talking to Roy Dean about this, because I was like, it's amazing to me that you'll get somebody that has like a PhD, in geology, and nobody's critical of them for not having a PhD in microbiology. They appreciate, like, oh, wow, you have this PhD, you're an expert in your field, and we value that information. It's never like, well, why don't you have a PhD in everything? And that kind of seems to happen with martial arts a lot, to where, everything you do at any moment with any technique in any circumstance is supposed to be the end all be all for everything. Like that seems to be how it's typically measured. Which, I mean, one could go back to just like our typical social responses, seeking, who is the alpha, who is the best, could maybe influence that. But I really think that, with your philosophy of what problem needs solved, and I also think your 3S's, I think you need a t-shirt. That's so immediately I think that's what you need to do is I need the 3S t-shirt, because that's genius. That if you could get some 20-year-olds to follow those rules, I think they'd have a lot less problems. But that philosophy that you talk about solving the problem, it gets very specific. But you also, I think what is unique is a lot of martial arts styles talk about, well, we're solving a very specific problem, but they don't have that pressure test part of it, where it's like, no, let's go for real, which that's what, the Dog Brothers has stood for forever, where it was like, you think you're tough? Go do that. And I think that having a piece of that in there, like you said, to test the adrenaline dump, to see what happens. I mean, because I can remember, I have so many quotes from you over the years from like VHS tapes. They're fuzzy and all this, but, typically, like you always see, like what angles are the most dominant whenever the fight happens, like it's ones and twos. Like that is the typical response to a lot of these people, is they almost go back to this, raw, impulsive, I have a stick, and just, that's what it
Mongo
turns into.
smash.
Exactly.
Yeah, which is why, going back to the first series, I began with that footage from 2001 of the man-ape discovering the thigh bone as a club. And, then, what was the next thing we showed, from southwestern Ethiopia, the Surma. Like, hey, that babe with the great breasts, I want her. No, I want her. Okay, let's fight. I mean, and the tribe comes to watch, and it's a very ritualized fight, but it's a fight that's a real test of the man. And so that was the foundation. So, I helped Eric prepare for there, and so the opening words he has in the tape there, he goes, "This is this. It's not a sword. It's not a magic wand. It's a stick. Probably the first weapon, the first tool that we picked up since we fell out of the trees." Now, those words, "This is this," piece of trivia here, that comes from a particular moment in the movie The Deer Hunter, where, you ever hear of the movie The Deer Hunter? Is I forget who I think it was Martin Scorsese, and it was Robert De Niro and Christopher Walken, as much younger men. And it was about a bunch of friends from, from Pennsylvania, the steel factories and, so forth, and, who went off to Vietnam and had the traumatic experiences that they did. But as they're getting, anyway, before they go off to Vietnam, they're going off, they've been drinking, and then they're going out hunting. And so the guys have been drinking, they're acting the fools, and De Niro, he shoots off a shot, boom, and they don't have their ear protection. It's like, dang, dude, what are you doing? And he holds up the bullet and he says, "This is this." And, there's a whole thing there. You can find the clip, just, put in the Deer Hunter and "This is this," and you'll find the clip. And so that's where those words came from. This is the stick. This is this. It's not a sword. It's not a magic wand, because on Filipino martial arts, we'll see it's really a sword. So all I have to do is defang the snake. Well, if it's a stick, you may discover that people can take a hell of a shot.
Yeah.
And
or grab a hold of it.
Yes.
So,
I'm sorry, how do we get on that? I get so many ideas flowing. Sometimes I go off in tangents. I'm sorry.
You were kind of talking about, like, because I'd mentioned the reality of this. And so when you go back to these realistic pressure tests, was there any of those full contact fights, like what was your most memorable, or just one of your favorite ones that you're like, oh man, this one time, we were doing some, we were out in the park, like, because we've gotten to the philosophy and it makes sense. So you got to share some stories with us. There has to be a few out there that's like, oh my gosh, this one time.
Well, yeah, a lot of fights, a lot of stories. I'll tell you one of my very first ones is I had just started with the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So this was summer of 1990. So actually the fight in question was September. I had a total of 9 lessons with Carlos Machado. And I met the Machados through Chris Howder, who's now a 5th degree under Higgin. And
he was on here actually. We just talked like 3 days ago.
oh, really? Yeah.
Oh yeah,
So,
a lot of good stories.
Chris and I were partnered up for an evening class seminar that was being and grappling that was being taught by Eric Paulson, who was then training with both Hickson and with the Machados, if I remember correctly. So that would have been 1989. And, you know, with all the experiences that I had with the Dog Brother Fighting, we had grappling. We had no idea what we were doing, but we were allowing it. And Eric had just stumbled across something that we came to call the Fang Choke, which is basically a case like a Tommy with a stick that, you know, you just,
yeah.
And so he was fanging everything in sight. And so when I started with the Machados, instead of starting with, normally they started with the defense against mount position. You know, that's the classic progression. But because of this Fang Choke, Carlos started me with counters to Kesakatami, which is basically, you know, where most of the Fang Chokes, you know, is basically, you know, it's a scarf hold with a stick for, you know, cranking in the, you know, very definitive, immediate choke, windpipe crush, you know, whatever. And I was fighting this guy who was, you know, 6 foot 245. There I was, 6 foot 195. Yeah, I had like 50 pounds on me, scary guy. And he had a football background. He had played football in the Marines, and so he tackled me, and I knew to throw my legs around the waist because, you know, like, oh, okay, you know, whereas before I didn't know to do that. And so I threw legs around the waist, and he's going inside my guard. Boom, boom. So here comes the big right, and I managed to parry it off. And then all of a sudden, I spun him within my guard. His back's to my chest, and I choked him. And everyone went, "Damn, Mark, what was that?" And then the next day, you know, our Salty Dog, you know, he rolled into town, and we were having a day of fights, you know, sort of early gathering kind of a thing. And I've been training with Punungur Edgar Salite, and I showed him some footage of me, you know, fighting Arlen before, and Arlen was way stronger than me. You know, he was like maybe 15, 20 pounds heavier, but his powerlifting numbers were in the 1500s. You know, the combination of bench, deadlift, and squat. He's in the 1500s, formidable, and you know, way stronger than me. And he didn't feel pain very much. So, you know, it's like, well, he doesn't hurt, and he's stronger. You know, this is a problem. And so I showed some footage to Punungur Edgar, and he looks at it and he says, "Oh, for him, it is easy. You keep your hand higher than his." And I went, "Huh? What do you mean?" He says, "Well, his thing is when he winds up here like this, if you're in the middle, if he's above you, you want to roof block, and that's when he drifts under and he hits you in the knee. And if you don't go up with the roof block, he's going to hit you in the head. But if your hand is always already higher than his, no matter where it comes in on the high or the middle or the low line, all you have to do is drop." I said, "That's brilliant. That's brilliant." So if you watch that footage in tape 5, I'm kind of waving my stick around up there like this. But what I'm really doing is Punungur Edgar said, "Keep my hand higher."
Yeah.
And so, you know, Arlen, you know, he was confident in his, you know, dominance over me strength-wise. And so he just rushed in. And most people, when they, you know, sort of came in behind the roof block, it would go, you know, it would be the stick hand that would grab the head. But Arlen, he had a way of doing it the left hand. He had a very good intuitive left hand. Even from the beginning, just out of sheer naturalness, he could stiff arm even Eric when Eric was trying to come in. Yeah. And so he comes in, he grabs me behind the head, and then this is where my training with the Machados kicked in, all 9 lessons of it, which is when somebody grabs you in a headlock, which is a natural thing for a bigger, stronger person to do, he's giving you his back. And so that's where I submitted Arlen twice that day. And, so, it's, if you look at if someone look at the skills on display in those fights, yeah, things have moved since then quite a bit. So the fight levels, that, in those days they weren't, the skills have evolved. It's just like watching the early UFC. You look at, like those guys wouldn't even rate on an amateur card now. Yeah. But at the same time, there remains a wisdom there, sort of a purity of a particular way of thinking and doing against the purity, another pure example, I will strike, I will grapple. Well, no one does only one or only the other anymore. But, and then there was, you watch it, the evolution, then you had the wrestlers who said, well, yeah, you can't put us on, we're not afraid of the ground, we're going to be on top. And then you had the beginning of ground and pound. And then you're like, oh, whoops, wait, a wrestler says, I just got armbarred, I need to learn to keep my elbows in. So now it matters how you get to the ground, not just that you fall it to the ground. So now all of a sudden, Muay Thai clinch, Greco-Roman started becoming relevant. So there's this evolution over time.
But it seems to come from like the principle that you kind of talked about, that was just like expanding your knowledge, solving different problems. It's like you taking the back that one day back in the, the 90s, early 2000s, with rudimentary jiu-jitsu. That's the same principle that guides the most elaborate spider guard in the jiu-jitsu scene, is I need to solve this problem that is occurring. And the problems keep evolving as far as like how they seem to come out, how they materialize, but the principle of solution finding is the same.
Yes. And so, so I was the one who brought Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to, our Dog Brothers Real Contact stick fighting, but it has to change in the context of a weapon. There are things that are really good, appropriate responses in empty hand MMA, which are huge errors if sticks are involved, which are huge errors if knives are involved. And so, something we've been doing, I guess, for, if I were to pull a number out of my butt, I'd say about 8 years now, maybe 10, is that we allow people to hide knives on their person, training knives, obviously.
Right.
To hide knives on their person. What happened was we had guys who were coming in, they learned to sort of swat back once and forth with a stick, and then they'd rush in and do bad blue belt MMA. Yep. And you're like, no, that's, it's kind of bypassing, the weaponry skills. And it's just like, okay. But if you discover that you grab somebody, go to the ground, and now he starts stabbing you because he just accessed his knife, And so what that does is, in the adrenal state, and what you do in the adrenal state, what you experience in the adrenal state, is the deepest learning of all. And so one of the things that teaches is keep track of his hands. And that's a really powerful lesson for when you get to street situations where, for example, my friend Craig Douglas, known as South Narc, outstanding trainer, he has the 4 Qs of criminal assault. When I teach them, I call them the South Narc Fort, so that people should know where I got it. And, so, what are they? Grooming gestures, eye shifts, hands disappearing, and weight shift. If you see those, somebody's gearing up, any of them. You don't need all 4. But yeah, if you start learning to keep track of, like here I am. So for example, I have this Mexican pullover here like this. Oh, my hands have disappeared. Well, is there a weapon in there? It looks like I'm just messing around here like this. Do I now already have a weapon in hand? This is a concealed draw, covert draw versus a quick draw. My hands disappeared. You can't, my hands turned this way instead of this way. Do I have a knife palmed in there? If I'm like this, and it's nighttime, I'm kind of like this. So, so, wow, hands have disappeared. Might be, could be weapons involved. He could be just winding up a punch. Oh, whoops, there's a knife in it too. So you need
especially now in the cell phone age, I think that is something that gets neglected and almost we're desensitized to, because everybody's always holding a cell phone. So it's like our brain almost subconsciously is something in the hand, probably a cell phone, reaching in the pocket, probably a cell phone, and training past that, so in the last 30,
Well, yeah,
40,
so by having the hidden knives in the fighting, people learn to keep track of hands in the adrenal state. It kind of tends to stay with you.
yeah,
And so, the jujitsu in the context of weaponry, MMA in the context of weaponry, empty hand underhooks are considered superior to overhooks. But
yeah,
if I have a knife in this hand, you might want to have an overhook wrap.
yes,
Because if you underhook this, yaha,
yeah,
not so good, could be a Darwinian error. And so, with the stick grappling, the way I like to articulate it, it's like, I come from an era where there was pinball.
hmm
And, so the machines would get to, if you were doing well, you would set up a thing where 3 balls were in play at once. And if you are, now with 1 ball, you're sort of jogging the machine so that the bumpers hit it. You can control the ball a lot. But if you're focused on only 1 of the 3 balls, the other 2, you're going to lose them. So you need to diffuse your focus and keep track of 3 things at once.
yeah,
And with the stick fighting in the grappling range, you have the stick fight, you have the grappling fight, and you have the stick grappling fight. So
different
you might, if
circumstances.
you're in guard, you might never reach out like that. But if I'm, if I'm abanicoing you from here and you reach out like, oh, now I got you, ha, boom, boom.
Right.
So it changes things when there's weapons involved.
Absolutely. And I feel like that, and I think the underlying thread that you've mentioned is all of these training methodologies can fall under attribute development. You take a high level athlete fighting in the UFC, training every day, you put him in front of you for the next 6 months, he's probably going to perform fairly well, because he has other attributes that have transitive properties. Just like whenever you take somebody that's been doing, Filipino stick knife fighting for a really long time and you move them into an open hand scenario, which you kind of mentioned, that transitive property is like physiology is physiology. And I think that probably some of the things that you highlighted are like the mental skills that need to change as far as responses under adrenaline duress. And that's, some of that integral programming that people need to be evaluating and finding ways to connect, which I think you guys have done a great job, because I mean, if there's heroes out there, it's definitely the Dog Brothers, because those guys are for real. They fight with sticks. They're crazy, but there's a lot of science and methodology that I feel goes behind your approach. And you've really been able to articulate that well, that it was not derived from, oh yeah, you think that's tough, watch how tough this was. It was solving a problem, as you said, and the problem was the adrenal dump, having weapons involved, and just the erratic, scary circumstance of the unknown. I really appreciate you taking time today to talk to me. And is there anything you'd like to close with?
Yeah. If you would like to get involved with what I'm doing, we have the Dog Brother Martial Art Association. Go
Okay.
to dogbrothers.com and click your way along the yellow brick road to sign up for the association. It's $30 a month or $300 a year. We've got, we're closing in on 2,000 vid lessons. Over time, all of my DVDs are being included in that library. The essence of my sales pitch is this: give us 2 months and we'll have you hooked. Give us a
Yes, sir.
try. And I'm there on the forum every day, pretty much. It's not, some associations, there's a name and then, like the forum's
Yeah.
nothing. There's a continuing conversation. Various DBMA instructors are in there. So there's a real conversation and a real sharing, people of all kinds of levels and so forth. And dogbrothers.com, join the association.
Yes, sir. I definitely, and I'll put that in the show notes so that people can find you and kind of check that out and do a little bit of research. I hope you guys have a great weekend. I really appreciate the time, and we'll be talking soon. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. The adventure continues. Out.